season 3. So Noun40, I want to start with you. So to level set the conversation here, would you mind, giving us a review of, how we sort of end up here in season 3? What has happened in season 1 and 2? What are some of the most significant events in the past, 2+ years in the Nouns history?
Hey, happy to be here. And I'm also very excited for Nouns to be a lot more integrated with Forecaster. And so that's really one of the big motivations for me, kind of going into season 3, or the intentions is to create a public conversational space where the group that remains and is optimistic and excited about Nouns can actually kind of have that shared celebration and conversation. As I think there's been a lot of that kind of in private groups or private Discord servers, etc. And the public negativity was so bad that you couldn't really have a kind of positive version of the public conversation in public. Mm-hmm. But I think with season 3, it's kind of that energy is coming back. And also specifically, I think the kind of Forecaster channel is becoming a place where that's very much possible. We can set up another Discord server, but ultimately it won't scale again. When we have more than a few hundred people inside of it, it will break down. We can try to have it in Twitter, but Twitter, it feels like unless you have a big following, you're shouting into the ether and nobody's listening to you. And I think the Forecaster channel has kind of been the really happy middle ground between the two that kind of solves both problems, where it's an asynchronous conversation. It's not like a group chat where somebody can troll and be like crazy noise to everyone else. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like you have to be completely you have to already have a big following to have a voice. You can 100%. Speak to the Nouns channel and people will actually react and read your things and etc. So anyways, that's a big part of what excites me about the kind of the potential between Nouns and Forecaster in the upcoming season. Mm-hmm. But maybe just for people that are not familiar with the language of seasons, what is even season 3? Well, so one way to think about Nouns is that it really is a player created universe. If you think about it as a game, it is a game that does not have a game designer. It is an emergent world, and so there is nobody that is giving us seasons or new meta to play, and rather all of that is emergent. So it's just kind of the story is unraveling, and everyone is playing their role in kind of how the story is unfolding, and we as a community just kind of decide oh shit, this is a meaningful key event, and then from that kind of inflection point, we kind of say a new season begins, etc. And I think most people define season 1 as from the inception until it was the honeymoon, beginning, mm-hmm. NFT bull market, all of that, to when real divides emerge. The original Discord server where everyone was vibing starts to dysfunction and doesn't really scale, and then we have to close the Discord server. That's when kind of some fair amount of reality hits. After the honeymoon phase is season 1, and then everything up to now, the fork moment is, I think, when people define as season 2. It's the phase that I would think of as having the maximum amount of non-alignment and kind of disagreement between different parties, and governance being a bit of a bad vibe energy that at times has been struggling. I mean, Nouns as a movement and a brand and a project, an art project, has continued throughout season 2. And if anything, the proposal velocity and quality has increased. So that part has not really stopped, but the kind of the DAO governance has been very, very much struggling in its kind of alignment. And the fork mechanism that we've added is to some extent a reaction or solution to that, where it comes with an acknowledgement that ultimately, these permissionless organizations or crypto, the final kind of conflict resolution mechanism has always been forking. So how does Bitcoin or Ethereum deal with these things? Well, it's that ultimately the ability to fork always exists, such that if the different parties can try to work their best to work together, and if they can't work together, then ultimately they have the ability to fork. And then that kind of increases alignment amongst the people that stay. And that type of mechanism is necessary, or else the people will forever kind of feel like because it's majority voting, ultimately only kind of one. Yeah. And anyways, so fork that's was implemented. It's fork day is now. It's ending today. Today's fork day. So today I think is like the season finale of season 2. And from today onwards, it's season 3. And so when we're talking about season 3, we're talking about basically the future. We're talking about post-fork, people that remain in Nouns and remain Nouns fans. What is kind of in place there?
Talk about what is your idea of season 3. What are some of the things that you are looking forward to in season 3?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to alignment, and so in season 1, there was alignment around what kind of stuff people wanted to do, and so like, it was easy to like rally a big percentage of people to get excited about your prop even before it goes on chain. Then it was like easier to pass the prop, which is like props shouldn't be easy to pass for like governance sake, but it's just like it just showed that there was like a lot of alignment around this stuff, and so the props are easier to pass, and it was also then just easier to like. Well, the community was smaller, so you can get behind the props and promote the props. And like, actually, one of my bummers in season 2 is, like we deploy this capital. Many DAOs suffer from this. I mean, Purple also, but it's like, we deploy this capital, this team goes and does something. They actually have a victory, and then the whole community is silent about it, because the community was just bickering amongst themselves. And so I think, my thought is like season 3 will be more fun. There'll be more alignment. We can do fun Noun stuff again. And then we can be like a supportive community and celebrate the victories. Some of that stuff got really murky in season 2 because there were trolls and, people were mad even though you have a victory. And so, just it all kind of comes back down to having alignment.
Yep. So, I also want to, talk about Nouns fork, at the start of our conversation because, as we already talked about it, today is the fork day. In a few hours, we're going to see the result of the fork. And as we can see, as of right now, more than 50% of the NFTs have chosen to fork. But only around a third of the holders have chosen to do that. So I would love to just hear either of you your view on what the impact of this fork on the Nouns community and the DAO and Web3 community as a whole.
Yeah, quick reactions. I think your point about like half of the number of token supply, but actually in reality a third of the holders is like roughly how I feel about is a reality. Because about 200 or so, I'd imagine, tokens that were sold in daily auctions this year are just bought by arbitrageurs that started buying because they knew that the fork mechanism was coming. So they knew a certain payout was coming, so they bought. So like those people are, to some extent, are not really participants within the brand or the DAO. And so in reality, it's about the third of the existing holders that had owned Noun before the fork mechanism was a certainty, that cohort selling out or kind of like forking, joining the fork and selling their position to the treasury is kind of the reality. And so I'm personally very happy about the state of play because to some extent, like a third of a buyer base that bought at kind of a peak of a bull market that is experiencing about a 90% drawdown. And it also, they bought in a time where Nouns was possibly more things for more people. And I think we have a little bit of a sharper sense about what it is and what it is not now. And for a lot of people, maybe it's not exactly what they imagined it to be. So either they're unhappy with their investment or they're unhappy with the direction of how the kind of consensus is emerging. But about a third of the people saying that they want to leave feels pretty healthy to me and like a decent size. And so, yeah, generally happy with the dynamic emerging.
Yep,
Yeah, the
Chris.
only thing, yeah, my only point to add is that, well, maybe 2 points. One, it's like, I do know some people who have joined the fork who like are just in the financial position where they just need the money. And, I'm actually super happy for them. They want to come back to Nouns one day, but, 35 ETH is just too much for them to pass up right now. And so I'm actually super happy for those people to, get their share back. The second is I think there was like a bunch of even like the OG nouns who turned into the arbors, or like they realized that was going to happen. And so they were just waiting for the fork to happen. And so, maybe there were like people who decided in the last 2 weeks, like rage quit, I'm out of here. But there's also people who have been sitting in their position for 6 months or longer, knowing this was coming, voting no to everything. They didn't quite join to ARB, but they became arbors in their current position. And so that 1/3 number, I still think is like even lower of people who like really tried to contribute to nouns. And then for one reason or another, just it wasn't for them or they had to get out.
Yeah. And Noun40, I remember that you brought up a point. It was, I forgot it was in your podcast yesterday or you tweeted on Twitter, that is fork is different from rage quit. Would you like to expand on that? Why this forking mechanism is not just a rage quitting?
Absolutely. So rage quitting is like any individual token holder having the right at any time to withdraw their proportional share of the treasury. And I think that request or that idea has always been asked for within nouns, because nouns have been roughly, the price has been down only since the very beginning. And it's always been the case that book value is slightly higher than auction price. So rage quit energy has been around for the whole time. But I think the overall consensus has always been that rage quit is not really part of the consensus social contract here. Like, if you put money into an art project foundation, maybe you get some say in like how that money is spent, but that doesn't mean that you can pull it out at any time. If you make an investment into a startup, that also doesn't mean that you get to somehow at any point draw your proportional share of what's remaining in the company's treasury. So like in a lot of collective funding endeavors, it is not part of the social contract that you can pull your money at any time. So I think there's like a cohort of people that are loud on Twitter about like this being some sort of like fundamental God-given right that they have. And I fundamentally disagree with that. And I think a lot of people disagree with that. And also was the reason that rage quit really never made its way into the protocol for the first year and a half. And so the fork actually kind of happened from a different place. And the fork, if you think about it, is more of a reaction to the fact that if either the veto power, so the foundation can go rogue, or kind of a majority voter base goes in a direction that you really don't agree with, let's say there's like an honest minority, then the unfortunate reality of the protocol is that there's no recourse. You can sell your noun on a secondary market and maybe you get some money back. But if what you wanted was not money back, but rather that you wanted to be able to continue with the vision of nouns that you were a fan of and that you love, then basically you had no recourse. And so the fork mechanism is a way of kind of reestablishing hope for that type of concern and alleviating that anxiety, that existential anxiety that any form of minority, whether they're honest or not, has to experience in a majority voting DAO. And I think that became a really true thing at the beginning of this year, where let's say kind of broadly, if you divide Noun's political spectrum to the book value crowd and the kind of meme value crowd, they were really going toe to toe for the first half of the year on almost like on a weekly basis. There was a contentious prop that maybe like 5 or 10 votes swung the outcome. And so it really felt like it could tip either way any moment in time. And so I think both camps felt very existential about if it leans in one day or the other and any additional amount, then their vision or their kind of the nouns that they love will no longer be possible. And so the fork mechanism is a mechanism that was really meant to alleviate that existential angst and allow kind of increased tolerance and collaboration between people that have different visions of what nouns can be. And and it is that because it is different from Rage Quit in the sense that you can exit and continue. Sorry.
Yeah.
Even now, even when this new fork DAO, we thought that it was just going to be people that fork and rage quit, and the first fork wasn't really going to be about an exit and continue. It was just going to be an exit. And now there's like new energy or some conversations or rumblings about people that want to actually remain in the fork DAO and try to do something different, more focused on the book value and increasing the book value. And that's great. Like that was the intention of the fork mechanism being added, and that possibility existing, even though it can be used for just exiting, that exit and continue being possible was the main thing that is really different about the fork, and that it then becomes an avenue that can be used by honest minorities as well. And to the extent that the book value crowd is an honest minority with a different vision about nouns, not just wanting money back, I think it's kind of a sign that it is actually serving its purpose.
Yeah, I do have some follow-up questions, but I want to go to Chris first to see if you want to add anything here.
No, the main thing I wanted to add is that like a few months ago in one of my group chats, there was like a thought exercise of like, what if we were the ones who forked? And that was like a real possibility if this fork wasn't triggered and instead the auction was being bought every day by the arbors and we couldn't get anything done, like then all of a sudden we had the option to fork. And in a lot of ways that just proves why this thing should exist, right? Like we we were close to becoming the honest minority that wanted to keep, spreading love and supporting public goods and work on this infinite art project and are Nounish. And so, so it just so happened that someone triggered the fork and the people who were in it for book value and financial gains joined that fork, but it totally could have happened the other way around. And so that just speaks to the positivity of it existing.
Mm-hmm. And, now that, after the first fork is done, do you think there's the possibility of, the money crowd coming back to attack, or I wouldn't call it attack, but coming back to try to initiate another fork when, there is opportunity to have some financial gain for that part of the group? Is it possible that we'll see a loop of, a constant string of forks being initiated by this group of people?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. One thing that I do want to say, and kind of, I'm in Wilson's friend tech group chat, and he kind of wrote some thoughts about this that I kind of resonated with me a little bit, and I'm kind of trying to relay some ideas there. Is that like, yes, it is worth trying to be like, think about edge cases and ways to defend yourself, but also getting lost in the infinite task of like making the fortress more impenetrable is in itself like a failure mode. Like, I think whole generation that experienced the Great Depression in the United States lived their whole life thinking that another Great Depression is coming in their lifetime. And maybe that's why it didn't come, but also it might possibly be that wasn't the right mind space to be in for the rest of your life. And I do want to kind of resist a little bit about over-focusing on like all these additional defense mechanisms that we should be thinking about, because that's not the energy that actually moves nouns forward. The nouns energy that moves it forward is the art and software that we build for the world, and the kind of culture that we celebrate together, and the movement that we build, and the positivity and optimism that we share together. And some amount of energy is necessary to make sure that we can defend ourselves against hostile actors. But the defense itself is not the thing that actually makes this what it is or what we hoped it to be. So just wanted to kind of say that at the top. And that's just to answer your question. Mm-hmm. Maybe they will come back and try to buy. But like, there's a lot of things that somewhat resolves that from my perspective. One is just spending alone will continue to bring down the book value, and maybe we go through one more fork that is like 20% fork, in 3-6 months. And then in a year later, then the book value is roughly like after finish funding the Nouns movie and like going through another round of like funding most of our kind of $1 million a year budget teams like Nounish and the esports team and the Verbs team and Agora, et cetera, like maybe we just get back to book value. So we just experience one more 20% fork where maybe they were competitive against each other and like they don't really make much profit, and that's it. That's like, you know, that's, I think, a very like reasonable way in which this also gets resolved. Like, there can't be another fork again. I don't know is necessarily the right energy. Of course, there's a lot of things, other things being discussed as well. People are talking about distributing Nouns to bring down the book value. People are talking about kind of aggressively spending or even burning the ETH to bring down the book value. I'm generally of the camp that we should just kind of charismatically continue to live our lives in the way that we would have without being too concerned, and it will likely resolve itself regardless. But yeah, that's kind of the set of things to consider there.
100%. I'm in agreement with you. Chris, anything you want to add in that regard?
No, I mean, I think that was really well said. I think probably like I tell you, I said in my group chat today, like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about this fork. But by the way, I'm not really thinking about this fork. It's like, I'm thinking about season 3. There's alignment. All my group chats are super excited. Like, this is fun. Let's go, you know? But that being said, there's a little bit of like, at least watching what's happening, right? And so I think like maybe this does become an issue in 2 months when we realize it's happening again. But certainly not waking up tomorrow trying to mitigate this.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And I want to remind people listening to this, if you want to ask questions, you can put it in chat or you can request to speak. For people already on the stage, you can unmute and talk at any time if you want. And I'll keep going with the question that I want to ask, unless someone else wants to inject. So speaking of, the future and the things that we can do in season 3, could either, each of you name a couple or maybe several projects that you think Nouns should fund in, season 3, and what are some of the things that you want people to build in the Nouns ecosystem? Noun40, let's start with you.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. And partly, again, what's exciting about Nouns is that it's a player-created universe, truly, where there is no designer that is giving us what should happen, but rather it's kind of emergent based on what the kind of infinite players want to do. But there's definitely things that I'm personally excited about. For example, the kind of Nouns governor that is being built by the Verse team, where we've so far always relied on compound governor that was assuming fungible tokens as the voting tokens, as the kind of base substrate of our governance system, and changing that, swapping that out, building something new that is aware of the voting tokens being non-fungible and that can take advantage of the discreteness of that token supply base. And for example, have such things as like every NFT itself specifically having separate delegation rather than every token in the same wallet address having to be delegated to the same party, which is a limitation of the compound governance model. Those types of things being resolved and like a much more vibrant delegation system emerging is one thing I'm excited about. I'm also very excited about the drop proposal kind of acceleration that Yitong is spearheading with kind of adding specific UI and software to accelerate that in the Agora product. In general, I think one of the things that we discovered in season 2, despite all the difficulties, is that drop proposals are a thing that kind of work, as in we're generally not supportive of, or kind of, we don't really want proposals to like go out and be a for-profit venture and then send the percentage of that revenue back to the treasury. That's not like a seed fund for for-profit ventures is not really what we want Nouns to be. But one thing that we are totally okay with is if we fund CCO art and that art is released to the world as a public good, as public art, CCO art, but then the artist sells NFTs based on that artwork, and captures kind of some of the provenance value of that art, and then shares some of that back to our treasury, is continuing to still kind of align with the machinery that we're building here, which is capturing some value of the meme value of public goods to then fund public goods again. So then it kind of is additive to that flywheel. And we've had success with that with a few films and animations that the Nouns has funded that were even kind of exceeded the kind of NFT sales exceeded even the funding cost in some of those props. So like, and also the Shorts Film Festival that Joel and that team kind of spearheaded was like one of the most fun and very cost effective and internet native things that we've done in season 2 that I thought was really successful. And so in general, kind of ramping up the infrastructure of like funding public art, CCO art, and then facilitating some of the value capture of that to come back to Nouns, or attention of that coming back to Nouns, is like something that I really want to help facilitate. And there's a lot of people that are, I think, excited about that direction as well. Jacob is also one of the people that are like maximally like that is what Nouns should be about, and just do that faster and more. I'm not as extreme as Jacob, but like there are people that have that view, and I see that view as well. So those are some examples of things that I feel pretty excited about in season 3, but also very open to whatever emerges.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Chris?
Yeah, and then I'm just kind of interested in funding more people. And so there was a point in the past few months where it felt like you could only put up a Nouns prop if you wanted 100 ETH, and there was no room for like a 5 ETH prop or a 10 ETH prop. And I think none of that was true. None of that's true by the rules, right? But it was just so hard to pass a prop that it like, you were only going for it if you have a 100 ETH prop. And so I think like we lost a lot of like the mid-range and cheaper, cheerful stuff. I think Prop House is like an amazing mechanic to fund some of that stuff, and Nouns has done a really good job, but also Prop House at Noun scale can be like very overwhelming as a voter, you know, when you're at like peak Nouns and there's a new proposal every day, and so you're reading a 5,000 word proposal, and then you go check out, oh, today's the day to vote on Prop House, and there's 100 submissions. It's just very overwhelming. And so we started to have like a lot of attrition, and then not a lot of voters in Prop House, and then a couple of whales just picked all the winners. And so, Noun40 has a candidate prop up now to sort of, I would call it grants council. He positions as like the Prop House gardeners, where it's a group of 20 something people, who were selected to vote on Prop House. And that's like what their focus is, and that's their thing. And so I think that could be, a really interesting way to like bring new life to Prop House and start to fund. Yeah. And again, Prop House has funded some large ETH numbers too, but in general, like it's a great mechanic to fund some of the smaller stuff. And then the other side of that coin is I'd love to see like just some kind of more robust retroactive funding mechanism in Nouns. Like, now through our experience in Purple, and then some of my experience through Optimism, it's like I'm so bullish on retroactive funding. And there was a time, I think, in season 1, and like the other thing that feels like lost in the weeds here, like in season 1, it was like you didn't need funding to be Nounish or do an art project or throw an event or do whatever. It's like, this is CCO, it's all of us, and we all own it. And I felt like some of that energy had been waning in the last couple of months. And so I think retroactive funding can be a great way to reinvigorate people to just go and do the thing on themselves. Retroactive funding is not good when someone is expecting the funds. That's like a trap for unhappiness. But when people are just doing things altruistically or because they love Nouns and they're spreading the meme and it's impactful, like we should have a mechanism to retroactively fund those people. And this is something else I'm thinking of, like small scale funding from 0.1 ETH to like, I don't know, maybe 10 ETH. And so just, then obviously the ideas come from everywhere in Nouns. That's the beautiful part. But I think like my interest is like, how do we get more of the community involved? In fact, it's another thing where like in season 1, it felt like you didn't need to hold a noun to be in Nouns. We were all part of Nouns. And then some point towards the end of season 2, it was just like, nope, those guys hold the tokens. They get to make these 100 ETH decisions. TMS is doing their amazing work and sort of holding the community together a little bit. But it just didn't feel like you just decided to be nouns and you're nouns, And so I hope we get back to kind of those kind of vibes.
Yep. And, speaking of the new things that we can do, one of the things that you mentioned is, potentially we could have more things that are built on both nouns and Farcaster. Obviously, the Webcast/Farcaster channel is a great start, but I would also to hear from each of you, what are some of the things that you think could happen? Collaborations that could happen between nouns and Farcaster / nouns and Purple. And let's start with you, Chris.
Yeah. So I think my interest is actually one level higher than that, which is nouns in the Farcaster community, because there's so much builder energy in Farcaster community. Like, it's activated. We're building shit all of the time. It's like not a week goes by where I don't see like an amazing new thing. And again, a lot of this is like, some of it's VC funded or has their own funding mechanism. A lot of it's like just because people love Farcaster. And so I feel like, and nouns has always had a lot of builder energy. That's like sort of what it is. But like, how do we merge these two groups, and more so like, how do we funnel the Farcaster energy and builders to start doing some nounish stuff, and being fairly compensated for it? So that's like super interesting to me. And then where Purple's role might be is also helping facilitate that, right? Like being like a proponent of nouns, like teaching the Farcaster community how it works, but also like helping bring the nounish people in so they see all of this good work happening. And so it's just sort of like these two very separate dev communities. And to bring them together, I think can be really powerful. And, I can't speak enough to like, Farcaster is one of the most special places I've ever been in my whole life, as far as like communities of builders building amazing stuff. So that's kind of my big picture thing. Then like, obviously tactically, I see the channel being used, and it's like, I don't know how much sense this makes right now, but you can see custom nouns client, custom FIP2 integrations into all of the nounish stuff. So I think that's like the very obvious place, but I think the less obvious place is like, we have amazing builders. Nouns has amazing builders and ambition, and it's like, let's merge that together and like build some super org,
Can I just step in? I have this is a great discussion, by the way. So I just want to know, Purple is I know a little bit about Purple, but Nounish is new to me. I wanted to know, do you guys still require gas for voting for Prop House? And also, how does it work? Like, for example, if you propose something yourself, can people still vote for themselves?
I can take just a mechanics question here. So, Prop House. So there's two different ways that you typically get funded through. So let me just back up and say Nouns is a protocol, and Purple, and it's a DAO, and Purple is kind of a DAO that runs on top of the Nouns protocol. And there's some nuance to that. We actually use a builder DAO version of the Nouns protocol, but there's a lot of similarity going on. And so there's two primary ways people get funded. One is on-chain props. Those are, you're putting your vote directly on Ethereum, and there are gas fees for that. Nouns refunds the gas fees. So, as a Nouns voter, you get the gas fees refunded. Purple does not. Our treasury wouldn't allow for that. You do pay gas fees for putting up a proposal in both cases. So there's that. On the Prop House side, which is, how Purple does its retroactive funding, it's how Nouns distributes a lot of its initiatives. That's actually off chain, and so you sign your vote, but you don't. But there is no gas fees. There's no transaction there.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that, Chris. Appreciate it.
And thanks for the question. And Noun40. So, what are some of the things that you think Nouns and Farcaster could build together?
Yeah, the Nouns channel really got me spending a lot of time inside Warpcast specifically, but thinking about Farcaster more broadly. And like, now my mind is just starting to cycle a fair amount about different ideas. So I think partly once Nouns people start spending time inside of Farcaster, I think like, again, ideals will be emergent and needs will be emergent, and I think a lot of things will kind of naturally solve itself. But immediately, some things that come to mind for me is that the thing that felt very special, at least by the kind of channel capability, is that like you can have something that is asynchronous, but is scoped to your community. And that's kind of obvious because there's a number of existing things that are like that. And the most obvious, thing is a subreddit. And so like, could we build kind of like a subreddit type thing for nouns based on the Farcaster protocol? That is a question that I have. Of course, just a Farcaster client that is scoped just to the nouns channel is also an interesting thing. Maybe a little bit more abstract, and I don't know exactly how to articulate because I don't know all the technical details, but like maybe a potential thing here is like something that is interesting about nouns, that nouns has a lot of governance clients. So
Yep.
we have Agora, we have House of Nouns, we have voter.wtf, like we have multiple governance clients, and that's probably even going to accelerate further. Now we have candidate props, and we're probably going to have governance clients that focus on candidate props. And so now, and also like prop house, we have a singular prop house, but we're probably going to have multiple prop houses. So we have a lot of surfaces that basically interact with these on-chain actions. And I think nobody has quite added like a successful commenting system on any of these things yet. Like House of Nouns try to do a commenting system on where people can kind of like more casually comment on props rather than putting it on chain. But like it was siloed to House of Nouns, and like they had an API, so like you could pull it and use it on your site as well if you wanted to, but like that doesn't feel exactly right, and you don't have any kind of neutrality guarantees, etc. So none of that. We don't have a universal commenting layer across all the governance clients. And I wonder if like something like Farcaster, I mean, I have been wondering before I was a little bit more in my mind in like Farcaster of like, oh, maybe we'll just, once we have like EIP 4844 passed and like gas is more cheaper and it's just like subcents for transactions on L2s, maybe we'll just be putting all those comments on L2s as well, and people won't care, and we'll just like have everything on chain. And on chain is just our universal commenting system. But
Yeah,
but there are issues with that, like indexing is slow, blah 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 blah. So like I've kind of wondered if Farcaster is a better solution.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I mean, you are much more the expert about what I'm about to say, Bill, but it's like, what we know as in the Warpcaster client as channels, like some of us also know as FIP2. And basically, like, we can attach a channel to anything, like a blog post, a website you visit, a proposal, a podcast, and that sort of, I haven't seen actually a lot of experiment. One of the things I wanted to do with Purple was like, hey, let's do a prop house round around FIP2 to see creative use cases of it. But that sort of, I feel, feeds right into what Forby was saying here was, these things can all have channels. They can all be read from each other, and then maybe in the official Warpcast client or ultimate Farcaster clients.
Yeah, I think the universal commenting system like is really an appealing thing to have like in the nouns ecosystem. And I think Farcaster, I can't think of any other protocol that's better suited for this purpose, because Farcaster doesn't have consensus mechanism, which means like the throughput is really high, and you can embed the channels anywhere, and you can directly talk to the node in the network, which is called Farcaster Hub, to pull the global state of all the casts, and you'll be able to put that on your website, whether it's a nouns client or it's nouns builder. Nouns.build already has that built in. So and also you can reply to any arbitrary string, right? That string could be a proposal, could be a vote, could be an auction. So like I feel like that this is an area where Farcaster could really help nouns to develop such a commenting system. And I'm sure there are a lot of builders in the Farcaster system ecosystem that would try to build something like this, which would leads me to my next question, which is the nouns is getting a lot more attention, on Farcaster. But people, I would say a lot of people, they don't really know the details of how nouns work. So for a Farcaster builder, what is the best way for them to get involved in nouns today? At the start of season 3. Noun40. Let's start with you.
Yeah. I think Nouns is, to some extent, still a world that is hard to digest very simply.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I've actually, maybe I'm kind of on the non-consensus view here that that's not exactly a problem, because a lot of games have kind of deep, complex universes, and that's kind of like the appeal to the core group of people. And then like ultimately it can spread out to like, it can evolve into a thing that becomes more understandable. But like the thing that I'm usually more focused on is that, is there something compelling for the infinite player that is infinitely curious? Like in that way, for example, something like wine is very well developed. Like it has like an infinite rabbit hole. Like you can go down by region, by winery, by vintage, by like,
Sure. Yeah.
And it is like maybe not super accessible, but it also has an infinite kind of map to play for the people that want to keep going. And then their kind of like passion and excitement ultimately permeates to new people's curiosity and kind of like leads them down the rabbit hole. So yeah, I mean, I say that because what I'm about to say is not very much like go read this one thing and you'll understand nouns.
Sure.
A few things to understand about nouns: that it's a headless brand. So like there is nobody that is an authority. So there is nobody that can write an authoritative thing that is like, this is what nouns is. It's always narrative wars. It's always a kind of multifaceted complexity. It is also, but there are a few characteristics about it that actually kind of afford a interesting kind of set of vectors for you to learn about nouns. One is that nouns is really an on-chain world. So we really live on-chain more than I think any other crypto community. I would challenge you to find another DAO that writes more of its kind of voting reasons on-chain, that is like publicly visible, and it has most of its contentious votes just dueled out on-chain. Like it's not like certain venture funds or like large teams have like most of the supply and most of the decisions are already made when things come on chain, and like it's just voted upon as like decentralization theater. That is not what happens in nouns. Nouns, you have like a ton of proposals come through every week, and the decisions are made on chain. So what that means is that if you are actually curious, you can go to any governance client in nouns and start looking at the proposal and the vote reasons. And that is really like your guide to understanding nouns, because it's almost like this kind of like direct democracy, like whatever the kind of like Roman form where like people just like step up and say something and then they vote, and then like everyone else kind of keeps doing that until they make decisions. Like that's how we make decisions in nouns. So if you just like sit in the forum and just like listen in on what everyone is saying based on like the proposals, then you start to get a sense of what type of political system this is and what the values are. And whatever you read from that is like probably closest to truth than any other distilled down form of it. And so, yeah, that's kind of like what I end up always recommending, is that like go look at the list of proposals that are recent, and then click on the things that interest you, and then look at and go to a governance client that will show the vote reasons and read through all the vote reasons and kind of weight it by the voting weight so that you don't get too swayed by one opinion, and then try to understand the conversation that's happening. And then you will get to understand how nouns thinks and feels about the specific topic that you're curious about, whether it's funding a movie or funding an esports team. Like, those conversations are happening there and have been recorded for history. So you can go to, if you're curious about how Nouns feels about esports, well, the esports team that Nouns sponsors has maybe 2 or 3 proposals, or maybe even 3 or 4 proposals in its history in the past 2 years. And you can go to each of them and look at how people voted and what they said and what they voted, and then you will understand the entire esports history of Nouns. And so that's probably like the best way to kind of go to understand Nouns if you're curious. Again, what I just said might not sound appealing. Then I don't think Nouns is for everyone.
I think.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I had a phone call. I'm good. So I think totally fair if, like, what I just described, it doesn't sound like a cup of tea, or like that doesn't sound appealing. Then but to some, like, I think for the person that sounds interesting, that's really the best way to go.
When we say on chain, are we predominantly still speaking about Ethereum, or is L2 like a big thing about Nouns? Like, are you guys operating on L2 at all?
We're currently just an L1 DAO, where I think there are energies within kind of smaller sub-communities within the Nouns umbrella to move to an L2. It's like the NARD community, for example, is trying to go to the Zora chain. And also, I think increasingly some of our kind of specific projects might leverage L2 kind of scalability capabilities. But the DAO itself, the main DAO that holds the $20 million treasury, will likely stay on L1 for the foreseeable future, because saving gas costs there is not the main objective. Kind of the maximizing the legitimacy and the kind of maximum guarantees that it will persist into the future is a bigger goal, and we just kind of refund the $10,000 or so of voting costs, gas costs, every year, so that people can kind of still vote without being blocked by that. So yeah, that's kind of how we think about it for now.
Yeah. I just wanted to roll back to Bill's questions on how forecasters can get involved, which is, this is not like a prescriptive way, but one of the things that made me think of is, like, it still remains to be seen what the culture of Nouns will be like on Farcaster and Warpcast, or like even that channel. Like, you know, what I was thinking was, like, you just drop in the channel and see what people are talking about, you know. It very much might be a very insidery channel, because if you're in that channel, you know. Yeah. And then so maybe we wind up with a culture where it's very insidery in that channel, but then, you know, all of these members are still on Farcaster, and so maybe they're posting to General or posting about Nouns. And so because I feel like one of the answers, especially just knowing the way Farcasters operate and how voraciously they check the app, one is, like, just follow all Nounish people and see what they're talking about and what they're excited about. And then, you know, I will try to do my part in celebrating the wins on Farcaster, just so everyone can see, you know, the wins. I think, to me, that's like the easiest way to get inspired is to see someone who's successful. It's like, and so even like at the proposal, like what Noun40 suggested, which is great, go check out all the props. You want to see the winning ones, you want to see the losing ones. You start to understand the culture. It can be sometimes hard to follow up. Okay, where did this winning prop go? Right. And especially, I mean, I don't think Farcaster solves this, but a lot of the celebration happens on Twitter, and it's very ephemeral, and 3 months later, it's basically impossible to find. So I would, like, encourage the Nouns community to, like, do the thing in the Nouns channel that, you know, have your own organic culture there, but then just continue to spread the gospel in the rest of the app.
Yeah. And to follow up on that, Chris, you know, what do you think Purple can do, to bring, or if anything that Purple can do to bring more, you know, Farcaster people into Nouns?
There is a crossover in numerous members, so there's some interesting synergy there. You know, we've just done a lot, I would say. This is something I feel this is not me complaining, but I'm just using the language you have. Somewhat underappreciated is that so many of our members told me, like, oh, I was never really interested in Nouns because I don't have 50 ETH. Kind of from the outside I was interested. I didn't really understand what it was, but then watching Purple, I now understand how Nounish DAOs work. And so I think we just kind of naturally, and, at least two members I know of, I think more have gone from purple to then buying a noun. And so I think we're just kind of our natural arm ramp because we're more accessible. From a price perspective, we're all pretty known people on Forecast and always happy to help. And so there's just kind of some natural arm ramp that's like, great, now you understand how on-chain proposals work. Like, go check out what 1,000 ETH proposal looks like over on Nouns,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Num40, anything to add there? I know you were involved like in the initial, creation stage of Purple. You were very active initially in the Purple's Telegram in the very early days. So anything that you think Purple plus Nouns could do together?
Yeah. I feel a little embarrassed because I bought a Purple NFT and haven't been active in
No
governance in
worries at
any
all.
way. No, I I think like the reason I thought Purple was interesting and significant when it first launched, and I was like very active in trying to kind of like relay some of the lessons I felt Nouns had learned about like in a year and a half in when Purple started, was because I thought Purple was like so interesting as in we had other nounish DAOs. Like we had like NARS, we have Shark DAO, like we have a few others that were mostly just derivatives of nouns in a smaller subculture, but they're still like NFT DAOs. In the kind of like JPEG NFT sense of the world, or the word. And Purple was like very clearly not that, because it's about the Farcaster protocol, and in that sense, it was like the application of the same civic infrastructure in a completely different orientation and goal and kind of protocol that it's trying to promote. And in that sense, I think it was like a really interesting experiment and like a worthwhile endeavor. And if it the things that Purple can learn that like is effective in actually either aiding the decentralization, public good funding, or community development, or just proliferation of like another protocol that is like as kind of broadly mandated like Farcaster, then we could potentially expand that to a lot of other Ethereum protocols. Because like to some extent people think about Nouns' ability to do public goods funding for Nouns, it just feels a little bit like, oh, that works in an NFT kind of JPEG NFT context. We're like a serious DeFi protocol or like whatever, it doesn't really apply to us. So like to some extent, I think whatever Purple proves out is much more in some ways expansive, and that's another reason I continue to be and like was originally excited about Purple, and so
Mm-hmm.
largely I would just want kind of the continued synergy or cross-pollination of things that work and ideas between both sides. And like, for example, if the Nouns Garden works out, as in like, if representative voting is better on Prop House rather than direct token voting, and Nouns is about to run that experiment at a large scale, and if that turns out to be true, then I'd love Purple to experiment with that as well. If Purple figures out, because it is much more integrated with the Farcaster community, and like a lot of its users are living on Farcaster, and like it figures out that a specific type of subclient, or like a client or some feature is like the right thing that really gets more kind of participation being possible or whatever, or like you build some sort of Prop House. Prop House is about to become a protocol. Currently, it's just run by a centralized team led by Seneca, but it's the protocol is launching in about a month, and that means that like anyone can build a client and run a Prop House house themselves. And so, like, let's say Purple builds a Farcaster client. Builds a Prop House client that is for Purple, that leverages like Farcaster identities, and like that is like maximally successful. Then, like, I'd love for Nouns to introduce that to like different sub communities with the Nouns, or even maybe Nouns the full DAO as well. And so I think like because we share kind of the same civic infrastructure or the substrate, it's kind of like a lot of different Linux distributions, or like Mac is actually built on Linux, which is why the Linux developers and Mac developers, or like that's why all open source developers can use Macs and still like everything works on the terminal, is because they're on the same substrate. And in that sense, I think like Purple and Nouns and all Danish Nouns kind of share the same substrate. So everything that is built or learned on one side can really easily permeate or cross-pollinate to the other side. And so just having that kind of communication open and shared communities, I think would go a really long way. And I'm kind of excited about that to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess like what I was just talking about forecast identities, I just like had one more thing that I actually am feeling pretty excited about as a potential here, is that if we really get the forecaster, like let's say the Noun channel on Warpcast to be like the public conversation space with like legitimacy, legitimacy being like it doesn't feel arbitrary to say that like this is where you need an FID to use a certain set of noun services, and like that's not weird because that's where everyone is, and also like it's permissionless and available to anyone, so it's not limiting anyone, and so like it's legitimate to a degree that never like a Reddit ID or Discord ID can ever be. And if that type of legitimacy is attainable, then I think using like FIDs and its ability to kind of group a set of wallets together, and its ability to tie a lot of the on-chain actions and artifacts like the open edition NFTs that it's bought, or like the votes that those set of wallets have made, as well as all the kind of communication and the social relationships that the FID kind of holds, and all of that in being kind of rooted in the FID, being the identity system that we might be able to rely on to have some sort of Sybil resistant identity system that then can further enable some sort of limited governance powers within the Nouns world that is not only predicated on the number of tokens that you've bought. So some form of like more democratic governance powers to combat some of the plutocracy that exists inherently in all kind of token voted governance systems currently, like is a very exciting possibility that might really change the substrate of like what Nouns governance means. And that's something that I also feel very excited about the potential here.
Like we can keep going on for a while, but I know we're at time. So any last words from either of you before we wrap up?
My last words for kind of the Fartcasters and the Purple members is when I met Noun40 at East Denver, he spoke to me about Nouns and Purple is the same society, and we have the same civic infrastructure, but we're maybe two different cities. And Nouns might be Rome, and Purple is somewhere 100 miles north exploring the frontier. And that's always kind of stuck with me. And I think there are just some natural synergies here. I think he did a really good job of talking about taking the learnings back and forth and experiments back and forth. But yeah, to me, like Nouns and Purple and even more so Nouns and Fartcaster was just always such a good fit. And so I'm excited to see the community show up, and, you know, I hope we all give them a warm welcome, which has happened, and just like keep supporting them and maybe seeing how we can get involved.
Yep. Any last words from you, Noun40?
No, just very much excited for season 3 and excited for the potential of like Nouns and Fartcaster communities to come together.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you everybody for joining us. This is fantastic space. Happy Fork Day, and I will see you on Fartcaster. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.